And joining us now here in studio, Ken Greenberg, architect and urban designer with Greenberg Consultants, Inc., and David Lieberman, professor of architecture at the University of Toronto. Gentlemen, welcome to our studio. Nice to have you here tonight.
Good to be here.
Steve.
Okay, if you're an urban planner, start with this. Ken, what does a casino, a big mega casino like we think of in Vegas or Windsor or Niagara Falls, what does that do?
Basically, it's a big introverted facility. Typically, the idea is to get you in and make it hard to find the exit, to make it as convenient as possible to go by the slot machines on your way to the bar, and to lose any sense of the outside world. So you don't want to see the outside world. Typically, there are no windows. You can eat, drink, and sleep there because the hotel is right there. You never have to have any contact. It's supposed to be obsessive. And so that creates a very difficult building type for a city, because what we're generally looking for in cities is to have buildings that actually have strong relationships with their neighbors that play off their surroundings.
Well, let me pick up on that. Is it impossible to build a single purpose, if you like, large casino without the kind of relationships to the surrounding area that Ken just talked about?
Well, it's certainly not impossible to build a single-purpose large facility. The question is not just the adjacent neighbors, but what is its contribution to the city, be it an economic contribution, a social contribution, and certainly there is a debate with respect to casinos, with respect to gambling. I think what becomes more problematic is its integration into the infrastructure of the city, be it a parkland system, as many of the sites you're probably going to ask us about, be it a transportation system. The danger of these single-purpose facilities is an isolated icon in the middle of a parking lot, which actually has little relationship to the fabric of the city.
Okay, but what if, Ken, they didn't do it that way? What if it wasn't a single all-purpose facility in the middle of a, football stadium-sized parking lot, but something that integrated itself better into the neighborhood? Can that be done?
I've seen a really interesting example in the years when I was working in San Juan, Puerto Rico. A lot of the hotels actually had casinos within them. These were small facilities off the lobby, typically the size of a restaurant. They didn't fill out the whole exterior of the building. You weren't a captive audience. You could go or not go, and it was a part of your evening. You could go to a club, you could go to the casino, you could go to the restaurant.
And that works as far as you're concerned.
And it was pretty harmless as far as the city is concerned.
Well, Ken, you're speaking of an issue of choice, where it might be, in fact, a tertiary facility as opposed to the prime consideration, the raison d'etre. And perhaps that's where it becomes increasingly difficult. And again, how do we measure it in our responsibility as urban designers and architects, as can a facility of this type in fact contribute to the nature and the quality of a city?
Okay, let me get the two of you then to weigh in on what so far seem to be two of the leading options. If a casino were going to be built in Toronto, and I appreciate that that decision has been made, and that you two, if you had a vote, which you don't, but if you did, you'd vote no, I get all that. The two sites seem to be at the moment Ontario Place down by the water and the Woodbine Racetrack, which is up in the northwest part of the city. So let's go through some of that. Are there any advantages to having it on the waterfront?
The advantages to the casino operator would be high visibility. The disadvantages to everyone else, including the citizens of Toronto, would be we would be squandering one of the best sites in the city for a spectacular venue for recreation, for culture, for access to the water, to a use that really has nothing to do with the water or the waterfront. Essentially, to put a big blank box on the water is about the last place you'd ever want to put it.
Might look pretty from the Toronto Islands, though.
There are lots of things that look pretty. That's a very
but I
shallow
think a
justification.
recreation facility of perhaps another sort, and clearly Ontario Place needs to be reworked. But forgive my nostalgia for Eberhard Zeidler's scheme for Harbour City, and I believe it was the late 60s before I moved to Toronto, in which he proposed an extraordinary housing community developing the waterfront, a housing community that would have benefits to the city as a whole because of its integration with a parkland precinct. And I think that is taking advantage of an extraordinary site, a single-purpose building casino or otherwise, I'm not so sure is the right decision for the city as a whole.
Understood. Let's look up in the Northwest then. There has been gambling at Woodbine for decades. Horses, slots, whatever. So it's hard to make the argument that putting a casino up there is somehow inconsistent with what has preceded it. So is that a more reasonable location?
You know, if you're prepared to sacrifice the people who live up in that corner of the city and what happens around them. And I'm going to give you a little interesting example. You may remember the Greenwood Racetrack at the Greenwood Racetrack at Queen and Woodbine.
Right.
When that racetrack was there, which had gambling as a big single-use facility, the whole neighborhood around it had a kind of pall cast over it. The moment the racetrack was removed, that stretch of Queen Street from the beach extending over to Riverdale came back to life in the most extraordinary way. It was the most visible demonstration of the effect that these facilities can have, not only on their immediate footprint, but on a much larger area surrounding them.
What was the good thing that they got rid of in the case of Greenwood that you think allowed for the possibility of that renaissance?
Well, I'm not even that crazy about the architecture of the new neighborhood that replaced it, but instead of having
Or the planning.
instead of having essentially a big blank box and a lot of very desperate people, and being out on the sidewalk after the races when all those people who'd lost all their money were waiting for the streetcar was not a pleasant experience. So it didn't have anything about the use that actually encouraged much to happen around it other than a few bars.
Okay, what about Woodbine, David?
What about Woodbine? I think has other possibilities. In the short term, it's probably, I would use the term, less bad. You're reinforcing an unfortunate circumstance, and perhaps if one's to take seriously some of the claims by the leadership at the OLG, there are ways in which it can be done responsibly. Again, I still find it difficult to imagine that that's the best use for the city as a whole. The other thing which has to be substantiated, and I don't believe that it has, is that it becomes a revenue generator, for example, for tourism, and that it complements the hotels, restaurants, which, aren't there. So would you, perhaps that's as damaging to the surrounding community as the necessity of support facilities, should they exist.
Well, let me put a third one on the table then. Downsview. For decades, there's been a lot of promise and a lot of hope around Downsview, and nothing's happened. It is a huge piece of, I guess, what is it, former Air Force Base or something? Huge piece of underutilized land right in the middle of the city. It's right on the subway line. How about a casino for that line?
If one's to use a series of metrics or parameters to measure desirable facilities which would allow for a single purpose development, casino or otherwise, certainly transit and infrastructure, Downsview offers it. But again, are we squandering this extraordinary possibility of an inner city park, something that got us quite international reputation around for its ambition, an ambition that has not been fulfilled?
Well, that's it. I think OLG would say we're not squandering anything because nothing's happened there, ever.
Well, that doesn't mean that you then retreat to doing a casino. I mean, there's a lot of talk these days about how the first-ring suburbs in Toronto are being treated and whether they're getting quote-unquote second-class treatment. And I think to put an undesirable use there and say it's the path of least resistance because people are less politically powerful, they have less ability to complain, and give them something that is going to bring, there's lots of evidence to show this, crime and prostitution and security
Okay,
issues.
but never mind those arguments. I'm interested in urban planning arguments.
Well, those are urban planning arguments, and it has to do with land use and
Because
compatibility
we do
of
have
land
to
use.
take responsibility for those decisions we recommend. Is there an interim measure? I'm finding it odd that I'm actually the one proposing this in a way where perhaps a short-term casino with the provision that the revenues, should they be substantiated, would go directly into the long-term development of the ambitious park originally proposed for Downsview.
I think I've found the compromise here. Okay, let's see. So a temporary casino at Downsview with the revenues going to creating that long-range visionary housing project and park that you talked about, you're down for that?
I'd certainly be willing to look at it. I don't have enough information in front of me. It's a risk.
You're not violently opposed to it.
No.
You're violently opposed to it.
There were 3 temporary casinos built in Detroit. I'm going to show you a couple of them in a moment.
Jim, you want to do this now?
They're still there.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
We've got Ken.
Okay.
Ken Greenberg has brought his slides, ladies and gentlemen. Ken, the floor is yours.
Okay, so the first one we're looking at, and this is a place where I'm currently working, is Atlantic City. What you see there is the Great Boardwalk in Atlantic City. Those very large buildings, including the one in the foreground, are casinos. The idea was casinos would bring prosperity to this city and
What have
bring
they brought?
back the great waterfront. I don't think it's too hard to see in that image the extent of the devastation of the surrounding neighborhood and downtown that has occurred as a result of these big introverted boxes.
What's this
The
one?
second one is St. Louis, where I'm also currently working, and you see the ballpark, but you also see south of the highway, below the highway, a casino-hotel combination, and around it, parking lots.
Sorry, I don't. Where is that? I see the Edward Jones Stadium.
Okay, if
where
you
the
look
Rams play, and then-
immediately below the Edward Jones Stadium and
Right.
slightly just below the corner, you can see a shadow. That's the hotel. It's actually a Four Seasons hotel.
Okay.
And the Pinnacle Casino. And to the left, you can see the great Jefferson Arch by Saarinen
Yes.
along the
But
Mississippi
what
River.
it's done is reinforce the isolation that existed by the highway rather than bridge it and provide a destination linking back to the city.
This is Detroit, and you see 2 casinos here, the MGM Grand Casino in the foreground. Behind that is the Motor City Casino on the highway. These were supposed to go on the waterfront. Mayor Dennis Archer had the wit to say, no, let's just stick these out on the highway somewhere. But what's important, again, look around them. No urban life or activity has occurred around these, and they've produced tremendous social problems for Detroit. This is Halifax. Now we're in Canada. And if you look right in the middle, you'll see a little red dot along the waterfront. That's Casino Nova Scotia. You come along the Halifax waterfront, the beautiful Halifax waterfront, you pass Purdy's Wharf, and you arrive at this casino, and what you then see, if we can go to the next slide, is the casino on the left with black glass windows right up against the edge of the water, absolutely fortress-like. The giant parking garage, the bus drop-off where seniors are brought there to spend their life savings. And one more slide. And this is what it looks like when you get up close. So the relationship between the casino and the water is nil. There simply isn't a relationship. You have something that, for all intents and purposes, is a fortress sitting on the edge of the water.
If that were an office with that, oh, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead. The last
One
slide.
final example is the Windsor Casino, which we know all too well. And if you look from a distance, you'll see again that it is the complete internalized complex that we've been describing with the hotel, with the giant parking garage. And then let's zoom in a little closer. And you can actually see that after all these years of having that casino there, anyone who pretended that this was going to be a strategy to reinvigorate that part of the city or revitalize the waterfront would have to be terribly disappointed.
Well, I think it's actually been the opposite, and I'm very glad that Ken has shown these examples. And I think it's the kind of facility, casino or otherwise, which is not about its contribution to a city. Too often, architects and urban designers have been concerned only with the parameters of their own piece of property in which they are consulting or working. Certainly, one has to be responsible to one's clients. And yet, at the same time, there's a broader responsibility of the professional, particularly as an urban designer, which is to contribute to the texture, the grain, the quality of life in the city. And the inward-facing facility does not do that. Now, there are examples, and I think, Ken, we were speaking earlier of certain sports facilities, which arguably have a great deal of illegal gambling. Every bar, if there's a bookmaker, let's be honest about it. I'm not so sure about that either, but I'm not here to judge gambling. I'm here to talk about making cities.
Yeah, it's the problem is that the casinos that we're seeing in North America have become the Walmart of casinos. They are these huge, extremely well orchestrated, very deterministic facilities. They have certain characteristics, and there's always a temptation, if you're an architect or an urban designer, to say two things. One, if I don't do this, somebody else will do it not as well as I would have, and I can change the type. I can somehow, through some kind of metamorphosis, turn this into something else. And my experience, having worked on 3 of those sites that I showed you a moment ago, is there is something so hardwired about what these casinos are that with the best intentions in the world and with all the rhetoric that surrounds their arrival in various cities or what city boosters think they're going to do, they just don't deliver. And in fact, in those cases now, the various state governments are applying enormous subsidies to try to compensate for and overcome the damage that these casinos have done.
But let me do a follow-up here, because you and I both have a lot of respect for a guy named David Crombie, former mayor of the city, who, when he was saying Toronto should go for the Olympics, because even though it's corrupt and miserable and it has done so much damage to so many other places where it's been, we can do it better. We can resurrect it. We can do the Olympics. We can bring the original spirit of the Olympics back to the Olympics. Could you not take the same view on a casino, which is, okay, we've seen the slideshow. Lots of other people have done it wrong. But it could be done properly. It could, in fact, reclaim a part of the city that right now is, for example, the Portlands, where nothing at all is happening at all. Could you not say, we can do it right?
Might I put an opposing example in there? We've spoken at length of government-assisted or private-public partnership of some
Are you
form.
going to deal with my question, though?
I am.
Okay.
And you speak of we can do it better. So let's look to Las Vegas for a moment. Las Vegas of 25, 30 years ago, the only revenue was from gambling. They gave away
We're
everything.
not Vegas, David.
No, but they gave away everything else. That's not the case in Las Vegas now. The revenue in Las Vegas is from the shows, it's from the hotels, it's from the tourist industry. Even in Las Vegas, I don't think that gambling is the primary revenue. So what is the nature of the facility you build?
But my hunch is if this thing happens and the city went to you and said, Ken, we don't want it to be this blight on the horizon. We don't want it to be something that sucks all the life out of the surrounding neighborhood. We want to give you carte blanche to do it. We need the revenue. We want to put it here. Figure out a way to make it work. Could you?
You know, I can make just about any building type or any building program work, and I've worked with many difficult ones, including big box retail and large sports facilities and many other things that have some of these characteristics. The casino is in a class by itself, the type of casino that we're talking about, and it is very, very difficult to change. And in 2 of those cases, Atlantic City and St. Louis, I'm now involved in a rescue mission organized by the owners and by the cities and by the states to try and overcome the difficulties. And if you're doing this as an economic development proposition, what you're doing is setting yourself up for failure that you will have to compensate for and not doing the things that could bring success. So my question is, why do it?
And I suspect City Council here in Toronto and in many other municipalities is going to be trying to answer that question going forward. Ken Greenberg, architect and urban designer with Greenberg Consultants, Inc. David Lieberman, professor of architecture at the University of Toronto. Good of both of you to come in tonight and answer our questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.